The air smelled of rosemary and slow-cooked lamb, but all I could taste was silence. She sat across from me like a ghost, still tied to the living. Her body was there, her hands fidgeted slightly with the linen napkin on her lap, but her gaze never lifted, not once, not even when I pulled out her chair or when the waiter brought the wine. It was as if she had already left, and this was just her shadow keeping the appointment. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. I told myself it was hunger. I hadn't eaten all day, nervous about this moment. But it wasn't hunger. It was tension. Old, deep, unresolved tension that coiled itself tighter every time she avoided looking at me. The restaurant was elegant but unpretentious. Soft jazz filtered through the speakers. Glasses clinked like chimes. Waiters moved like shadows, efficient and invisible. All of it blurred around us, like we were sitting in a bubble, sealed off from the rest of the world, from warmth, from normalcy. I kept glancing up, hoping to catch her eyes. Nothing. Her face was thinner than I remembered, more angular. Her cheekbones stood out like quiet scars of time. Her lips pressed tightly together as though if she relaxed for even a second, something might escape. A sob, a scream, a memory. She wore a soft blue sweater, the same one she used to wear on rainy Sundays, curled up next to me with a book she never finished. Now it looked like armor, a fabric shield. I cleared my throat. "You look," I started, but the sentence collapsed under its own awkwardness. She didn't even blink. I couldn't tell if she hadn't heard me or if she had chosen not to respond. So I stopped trying to fill the silence. I just sat with it. And in that stillness, I began to feel every inch of the past pressing in around us. I remembered the first dinner we had, years ago, at that little Italian place that's probably closed now. She was nervous then, too, but it was a different kind of silence. Back then, it was full of promise. Tonight, it was full of ghosts. She took a sip of water, her fingers trembling slightly, just barely. It would have gone unnoticed to anyone else, but not to me. The waiter arrived with our meals. I had ordered for both of us. Chicken marsala, her favorite, without mushrooms. She didn't protest. She didn't thank me. She just looked down at the plate like it was a test she hadn't studied for. I watched her for a moment longer, then turned to my own plate. The food looked perfect, smelled incredible, but my appetite had vanished. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said, finally, gently, not as a challenge, just as a confession. Still nothing. Her fork moved, pushed some rice to the edge of the plate. Her shoulders didn't rise. No reaction. I forced a smile, a habit I hadn't yet broken, trying to ease discomfort with charm. But this wasn't a place for charm. "I'm glad you did," I added, barely above a whisper. She glanced at me then, just for a second, and it wasn't warmth I saw. It wasn't even resentment. It was something else, like fatigue, but deeper, like all the emotions she could have felt had already been used up. Nothing left to give, not even anger. It was humbling in the most devastating way. How do you speak to someone who survived something you were part of? How do you reach someone who had to rebuild themselves without you? That's what this dinner was. Not reconciliation, not closure, just an attempt, a reaching. She set her fork down, slowly, deliberately. Her hands moved with intention, with gravity. She reached for her napkin, dabbed her lips once, then placed it neatly on the table beside her. And then she sat there, upright, still, not ready to speak, not ready to stand, but no longer just avoiding. Something was shifting, like a weight had moved internally, like a decision had just been made quietly within her. And I froze. The room, still full of laughter and motion and soft piano notes, suddenly felt very far away, like we were watching it from behind a thick sheet of glass. And in that fragile, suspended moment, I realized something. This wasn't going to be a dinner of answers. This was going to be a dinner of truth. But not yet. Not now. For now, there was only the silence, heavy, sacred, and waiting to be broken.
She still hadn't said a word, but the silence had changed. It wasn't blank anymore. It had weight, shape, a direction. And that terrified me more than anything. I wanted her to speak, of course I did, but not like this. Not with that stillness in her shoulders. Not with that calmness that looked like it had been carved, not found. That wasn't peace. It was control. The kind people build when they've been broken too many times. I watched her hands. She always used to talk with them. Now they were motionless, folded on the table, one thumb gently rubbing the knuckle of the other, like a nervous tic she wasn't even aware of. I remembered those hands in every season of our life, grabbing mine in the rain, pushing me away in the middle of an argument, tracing circles on my chest as we fell asleep. Those hands had built a home once, not just the furniture, but the feeling. They had held grief, joy, anger, forgiveness. Now they held restraint, a fortress. Across the table, I was running out of time. I could feel it. Whatever brought her here tonight wasn't going to last much longer. It was like watching a clock wind down in real time, and I still hadn't said anything that mattered. So I asked, softly, "Why did you come?" She looked up again, and this time she didn't look away. And I swear, in that gaze, I felt every mile she had walked without me, every tear I hadn't seen, every piece she had to pick up on her own. It wasn't a glare, it wasn't hatred, it was just truth, unvarnished, heavy, real. I continued. I asked for this because I needed to see you, not to fix anything, just to see you. Her expression didn't change, but I kept going because silence had become unbearable. And maybe I hoped that if I filled it with honesty, it wouldn't crush me. I think about it every day, the way we ended, the way I caught myself. She didn't flinch. I just wish I could explain. Her fork moved again, aimless. She hadn't eaten a bite, neither had I. There was so much between us now. Time, hurt, distance. But even deeper than all of that was something worse, the feeling that whatever we once shared, whatever language we used to speak, had been lost. That we were now two people trying to translate pain without the same dictionary. And then, just as I was about to speak again, she exhaled. Not a sigh, not tiredness. It was preparation. She was about to break the silence. I didn't know if I was ready to hear it.
She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look around for attention. But when she spoke, it was like the entire room stopped breathing. "I didn't survive because of luck," she said. That was it. Just that. 7 words, but they hit like a storm. She wasn't looking at me, not yet. She said it to the space between us, like she was finally letting go of a weight she'd been holding with both hands for too long. And then, slowly, she stood. She didn't push her chair back loudly. She didn't make a scene. She just rose, with a calm so still it felt violent, like the silence that follows an explosion. "I didn't survive," she repeated, because the world suddenly became kind. Her voice didn't tremble. It had the clarity of someone who's repeated these words in their mind 1,000 times before finally saying them out loud. I didn't survive because I got lucky, or because I was strong, or because it got easier. She finally turned to me, and this time, she really looked. Straight into me, into the version of me that had built this silence between us, into the person I used to be. I survived because of her. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even about me. It was something older, something sacred. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on the table, right beside her untouched plate. A young girl, big eyes, braids, holding a stuffed bear sitting on a hospital bed. She was 7, stage 4. Doctors gave her months. I looked at the girl. Something in her eyes felt familiar, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. She smiled anyway, every day. She kept me alive. Her fingers rested gently on the photo. Her voice had no bitterness in it, only reverence. When I wanted to give up, she made me laugh. When I hated myself, she told me I was still magic. When I disappeared from the world, she pulled me back. Then she looked at me again, softer this time. I thought healing would look like revenge, like strength, like confrontation. But it didn't. Her eyes didn't shine with tears. They burned with something stronger. Completion. Healing looked like showing up for someone else. It looked like love I didn't think I had left. It looked like her. She tapped the photo once, gently. And just like that, she placed it back into her bag. And I realized this dinner was never about us. It was never about apologies. It wasn't even about me. It was about her finally saying out loud that she had made it, and why. Not because of some miracle, because of someone who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Because of her.
She didn't sit back down. She didn't need to. Her presence lingered long after she walked away from the table, like a fire that had burned clean and left only truth in its place. And in the echo of her absence, something became clear. She had taken something back. Not angrily, not loudly, just completely. I stared at the space where she had been as if I could still see her there, as if I could freeze that moment and somehow stop what it meant from unfolding. The plate in front of her remained untouched, the chicken marsala, still warm, still waiting, looked like a symbol now, a kind of offering that had gone unanswered. And the chair, it was still turned slightly toward me, tilted with some ghost of intimacy that no longer existed. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe properly. I'd asked her to come here hoping for some kind of closure, but I didn't realize closure might look like being erased from someone's story entirely. She didn't want my apology. She didn't want a second chance. She didn't even want to remember. She wanted to speak her truth out loud, fully, and then leave it there, between the silverware and silence. And now I understood something I hadn't before. All these years, I had been carrying guilt like a backpack full of broken glass, thinking if I just found the right words, the right moment, I could empty it out in front of her and be free. But that's not how it works.
Guilt isn't something you get rid of by handing it back to the person you hurt. It's something you live with. Quietly. Respectfully. Without demanding it becomes someone else's responsibility. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I remembered a night from years ago. We were in the old apartment, the one with the leaky faucet and creaky wooden floors. She had fallen asleep with her head on my chest, our dog snoring at the foot of the bed. There had been no drama that night, no wounds, just the kind of stillness that comes from feeling safe. That version of us was gone now, buried beneath the weight of things said and unsaid, mistakes made, absences that became patterns, distances that turned into walls. But tonight wasn't about what we lost. It was about what she reclaimed. When she said, "I didn't survive because of luck," she wasn't just talking about pain. She was drawing a line between who she had been and who she had become. And in doing so, she pulled herself out of the past, out of the version of her that I remembered, and stood fully in the woman she had become. And that woman didn't need me. She didn't need my memory of her. She didn't need my remorse. She had found something stronger, something smaller and softer than I expected. A child, a girl with braids and bravery. But that's how healing often works. It doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in the quiet, in the love we give when we have nothing left. She had found love that didn't demand repair, support that didn't ask for anything in return. She found her. And in that, she found herself. I looked around the restaurant. Everything had returned to motion. Forks, scraping plates, laughter rising from another table, a waiter pouring wine with a practiced hand. But inside me, something had slowed. Stilled. The noise of the room felt like static, distant and harmless. I took a sip of water. It tasted metallic. And I realized I was still holding on to something. Not her, not us, but the idea that maybe I could still matter. That maybe, just maybe, I was a chapter worth revisiting. But I wasn't. Not in her story. And that's okay. Because what she showed me tonight, whether she meant to or not, was that real healing isn't loud. It isn't cinematic. It doesn't wait for permission or applause. It just is. She didn't need me to understand. But I did. And in that understanding, something in me, something long frozen, began to melt. Not in shame, not in longing, but in respect. She came to this dinner to speak a sentence that had lived in her chest like a locked box. And when she opened it, she didn't ask me to hold it. She just let it breathe, and then walked away. And I stayed behind to finally hear it.
The chair across from me was still empty, but somehow it no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a monument, a marker of something sacred that had happened here, not with noise, not with fanfare, but with truth. I didn't chase after her. I didn't call out her name. I didn't ask her to stay. Because for the first time, I understood that this story, her story, wasn't something I had a right to shape anymore. Maybe it never was. Maybe I had just been lucky to witness the first few chapters. And maybe now, all I could do was honor how they ended. The silence she carried into that room hadn't been an absence. It had been a message, a presence I had never learned how to hear.
And now that she had spoken, now that she had laid it down on the table, plain and unadorned, that silence had changed. It wasn't heavy, it wasn't sharp, it was stillness. It was closure. And it was hers. I looked around the restaurant and realized I no longer felt like a part of it. People kept eating, laughing. Servers moved between tables. Music hummed gently overhead. But none of that belonged to me anymore. I was in a different space now. A space between endings, between understanding and letting go. I took another sip of water. It had grown warm. The ice had melted. The condensation traced slow trails down the glass, like it too had started to let go. The food in front of me was untouched. The plate she left behind sat just as it had when the waiter set it down, still full, still waiting, but no longer hungry. Just done. I stayed in that chair longer than I should have, not because I was lost, but because I was found. Something in me had shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but completely. It was like a locked door had creaked open just enough for light to slip in. A part of me, the one that still clung to the past, had been waiting for her to fix it. But she hadn't come here to fix anything. She had come to speak her truth. And once it was spoken, she had walked away with dignity. That's what healing looked like. And I had to learn that not being needed wasn't the same as being worthless. That love, real love, sometimes ends not with a scream or a slam of the door, but with silence, with presence, with honesty. I remembered the girl in the photo. Braids, wide eyes, a tattered bear in her lap. That girl had given her something I couldn't. She had held her hand through a storm I wasn't brave enough to stand in. She had loved her without history, without expectation, without the burden of guilt. Just love, pure and resilient. That's what kept her alive. Not a second chance. Not me. Her. And somehow, knowing that didn't hurt. It healed. I stood, finally, and placed enough cash on the table to cover both meals. I didn't leave a note, didn't scribble some final thought on a napkin. There was nothing left to say. The waiter passed by and gave me a nod, polite, professional. But behind his eyes, I saw recognition, not of who I was, but of what this dinner had meant. He had seen it before, perhaps, or maybe he just felt it in the air, in the way things had gone still for a moment, like the world had paused to bear witness. I stepped outside. The night air met me like a baptism, cool, sharp, honest. The street lights buzzed faintly. A breeze moved through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. I started to walk. Not fast, not in a rush, just moving, one foot after the other. I passed windows lit from within, families at dinner, couples watching television, a girl dancing alone in her bedroom. Life, it goes on, even after us, even without apologies, even when the story ends somewhere we didn't expect. And for the first time, I didn't carry her story like a burden. I carried it like a flame, not to warm me, not to guide me back to her, but to remind me of the power of truth, of voice, of release. She didn't survive because of me. She didn't survive because of luck. She survived because of her. And that was enough.